What do you see when the first mark in history glints at you from a slab of wet clay? The question arrives before the light does soft and insistent slipping into your mind as you stand on the chilled soil of a Mesopotamian dawn. A silver haze lifts slowly over the floodplain. The air tastes of river silt, barley dust, and the faint sweetness of date palms ready to burst. Down by the water, oxen snort clouds into the morning. A frog croaks loudly, far too confidently for its size, and for a heartbeat you almost laugh, because even here at the supposed cradle of civilization, someone is already making noise before breakfast. Shapes emerge around you, reed huts, woven fences, baskets stacked for market. You hear the river push against its banks, grumbling like a tired elder. Smoke curls from cook fires carrying the scent of flatbread warming on clay griddles. You feel the ground softening beneath your feet as the sun warms it thick, pliant, waiting. The land itself seems to murmur, urging you to notice the little impressions left by hooves, sandals, insects passing shadows, marks everywhere, each a tiny memory pressed into earth. And before we go any farther, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, write your location and local time in the comments. It's strangely soothing to see this ancient story ripple across modern hours. You step forward and the scene breathes into motion. Without fanfare, without any grand announcement, your story in this land of clay begins. A fisherman passes you muttering to himself about a net tangled by what he swears was a legendary river turtle. A child runs after him barefoot, leaving neat prints in the mud that vanish as quickly as the frog's bravado. You notice how every footprint and every basket imprint has meaning, fleeting yes, but unmistakably communicative. You can read them without thinking who passed by, how hurried they were, how heavy their burdens. These impressions are information, but they die with the next wind or the next curious goat. A thought strikes you, what if memory could stay? Not in your mind, not in the village. Elders' fragile recollection, but in something outside the body, something that endures. This is not yet writing, but it is the whisper that precedes it, the dawn before the wedge-shaped sun climbs the sky. Sumer is still young. Uruk and Eridu rise like cautious experiments from the soil. You see canals freshly dug and fields spreading wider each season. Grain stores swell. Herds multiply, transactions tangle. People are busier than ever, but their memories refuse to grow at the same miraculous rate. And already you hear arguments about who delivered what, who owes whom, and whether that shipment of barley was wrongly misplaced or simply eaten by goats with suspicious timing. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your awareness. Archaeologists date the earliest proto-writing symbols in southern Mesopotamia to around 3400 BCE, etched into clay tablets with nothing more than intention and a pointed instrument. Yet here in your present, it hasn't happened quite yet. You are standing in the quiet before that turning point, feeling the pressure build. Nearby, a potter tests the dryness of a bowl, tapping it with a knuckle. The vibration sings softly a syllable without a mouth. You run your thumb over a lump of discarded clay and feel its grainy coolness. Clay listens. Clay holds. Clay remembers. The idea grows inside you like a slow flame. You glance at the animals tied near the granary sheep-goats and one extremely unimpressed donkey. The donkey, for reasons known only to itself, stares at you with the expression of someone judging your entire life's choices. You nod politely. Even in deep antiquity, you maintain your dignity. As the village stirs, you sense rhythms carved not only by footsteps, but by needs, harvest schedules, trade routes, temple offerings. People mumble figures and quantities, but numbers dissolve too easily in hot air. A woman beside you kneels and smooths the earth with her palm. She uses a small stick to draw a symbol of a jar, marking how many her household must contribute to the communal storehouse later that week. By noon, the wind will erase it. But for the moment, it speaks. Historians still argue whether the earliest such marks were personal innovations or communal practices, whether one clever scribe sparked the writing revolution, or whether many hands slowly nudged symbols toward permanence. You feel the uncertainty in your bones' origins seldom leave clean footprints. A quirky fringe tidbit surfaces like a mischievous fish. Some researchers propose that writing began as a way to record beer. Yes, beer. Sumerians adored their thick, nourishing brews, and temple taverns needed accurate tracking lest someone forget a few jars. You can almost imagine the world's first frustrated accountant muttering, "If I have to memorize one more barley payment, I swear I'll invent a whole new system." A breeze slides across your skin. It carries hints of silt and distant mountains. You watch a merchant unload baskets of lentils, counting under his breath, with the worried intensity of someone who does not entirely trust the lentils to tell the truth. He's right to worry. The recipient disputes the number almost immediately, and a mild shouting match erupts. You stand between them, feeling the absurdity bubble. One side claims 16 baskets, the other insists 17. A passing worker munching on what might be the disputed 17th basket avoids eye contact. You sense it again, the world nudging humans toward a solution. Memory alone cannot keep pace with complexity. Spoken words drift away. Arguments multiply. And you, standing ankle-deep in soft earth, feel the future tug at your hands, whispering for the first deliberate mark, the first attempt to trap meaning in a durable shell. The sky brightens, painting the river like molten bronze. A flock of birds cuts across the horizon, wings beating in a rhythm older than cities. You inhale deeply, letting each scent, grain, clay, smoke, river settle into you. These are the ingredients of an invention that will outlast empires. You crouch, press your fingertip into the clay at your feet, and feel it yield. A small, soft crater forms. The mark means nothing yet, but something inside you stirs. A thrill, a promise, a faint laugh at the thought that someday, thousands of years from now, people will tap glowing screens to marvel at the moment you are living through now. From behind you, someone calls your name, impatient to get started with the day's work. You straighten, slowly brushing clay from your hands. The sun climbs higher. The world thickens with sound, and the hush that preceded writing begins to break. You walk toward the granary, toward the place where need will soon forge innovation, carrying the morning's question with you like a sacred ember. You reach the granary just as the sun lifts past the reed roofs, painting everything in that pale gold that makes even mud brick look heroic. Workers shuffle in and out with baskets humming half-awake tunes, and you feel the pulse of the place, steady, practical, essential. You kneel beside a pile of wet clay scraped from the riverbank. Someone dumped it here last night with the casual intention of maybe shaping it later, but you sense possibility in its glistening surface. You drag a finger lightly across the clay and watch the faint line curve behind it. Not an image, not a drawing, more like a trace, a thought that hasn't yet found its mouth. The muddy smell rises as the mark deepens. You hear footsteps approach one of the younger workers, curious, peering over your shoulder as though you're doing something suspicious. Technically you are. Humans don't quite know they're inventing writing yet, and here you are about to nudge it forward. He crouches beside you. What's that supposed to be? His tone implies it better not be another frog, because apparently children have been drawing frogs on every surface this week. You gesture vaguely because how do you explain to someone that you're experimenting with the seeds of civilization before breakfast? You draw a second line. Parallel. Intentional. He leans closer. 2. You nod. 2. It's a start, but the line alone doesn't satisfy you. You smooth another patch of clay and try a different mark. A round impression made by the tip of a broken reed. It looks like a tiny crater, one that might, with some imagination, hint at the shape of a jar or a bowl. You press it again, and again. Suddenly the curious worker gasps. "Oh, that's my mother's cooking pot." It does not look like his mother's cooking pot. At best, it looks like an indecisive biscuit. But you offer him an encouraging smile because enthusiasm is fuel. This is where the first whisper of writing begins, not as art, but as memory made solid. Because even now, you hear the morning argument replaying in your head, 16 baskets or 17. You think about yesterday's dispute over sheep, and the week before when 3 different families accused the same shepherd of forgetting whose animals were whose. Spoken words evaporate. But clay stays. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. The earliest proto-writing in Sumer took the form of simple pictographs, small recognizable drawings pressed into clay tablets to represent objects like grain livestock or tools. These weren't sentences not yet, but they were steps marks becoming meaning. You take one of the baskets and tip it slightly. The shadow it casts on the clay looks like a warped triangle, and suddenly you understand why the ancients leaned toward simplification. Drawing perfect likenesses takes too long, and artistry is unreliable. But capturing the essence, the idea through a quick impression, that's genius hiding in plain mud. You push your thumb sideways, creating a roughly triangular dent. Then you add 3 vertical strokes beside it. The curious worker tilts his head. 3 baskets. You nod again. The logic is working. A mark for the thing. Marks for the number. A combination, a phrase spoken by clay. A slight breeze lifts the smell of fresh barley from the storage room behind you. Farmers arrive leading donkeys that clop reluctantly over the threshold, each step leaving a short-lived signature. You watch the footprints fade as more people walk over them, and something inside you tightens. Impermanence presses against your chest. That is exactly the problem. The world forgets too quickly. Someone bumps your shoulder as they pass. "Stop doodling and help count," they say, with a hint of amusement. You've been accused of doodling since the moment you could hold a stick. Some things transcend millennia. You stand, brush your knees, and follow them inside. The granary is cool and cavernous, its stacked baskets rising like tawny towers. Dust motes dance in the slanted light. You take mental notes, barley, barley, lentils, barley again, and already you feel the numbers slipping. You glance at the clay outside as though it were a friend waiting to help shoulder the burden. Historians still argue whether early Mesopotamian markings began as personal mnemonic devices or as communal tools for temple administration. Some claim lone innovators began experimenting privately. Others insist collective necessity drove the shift from memory to mark. As you stand surrounded by goods, mismatched accounts, and mildly annoyed donkeys, you feel the answer living somewhere between both theories. You carry a small handful of clay back inside and place it on a flat stone. The others look at you with mild suspicion. Whatever you're doing, it's not regulation behavior. But there's work to finish, so they let you be. You press the triangular mark again. Then the strokes for quantity. Then another symbol, not a circle, not a triangle, but an elongated mark suggesting a goat's head. The first attempt looks more like a confused turnip. You try again. Better. A quirky fringe tidbit emerges. Some researchers believe early symbols may have been inspired by counting tokens, small clay shapes that represented goods and were stored inside sealed envelopes. When people began pressing these tokens onto the outer surface, instead of hiding them inside, the idea of symbolic representation blossomed. It's like realizing you don't need the whole goat, just a picture of the goat. A conceptual shortcut born from laziness, efficiency, or brilliance. Probably all three. A child runs past you, nearly knocking over a basket. He pauses to stare at your clay tablet. "Why are you drawing the grumpy turnip?" he asks. "That's your goat?" You sigh, scrape the symbol clean, and try once more. The child nods approvingly. Still looks like a turnip, but a smarter one. You're getting closer, though. You feel it. Something about repeating the mark, refining it, simplifying it, makes your body hum with recognition. You're shaping not an image, but a tool. A sign that stands for something real, even when the object itself is elsewhere. A portable truth. You step outside and let the sun dry the surface slightly. Workers gather around. Some squint. Some shrug. One of them laughs, saying it looks like the clay is trying to talk. You grin. That's exactly the point. Marks that try to speak. The tablet is crude, uneven, full of second attempts and shallow impressions, but it is something miraculous information with a spine. A memory that refuses to evaporate. A thought teases you if clay can speak today. What might it say tomorrow? You tap the tablet lightly with your knuckles. The sound is soft but certain, a whisper of future syllables. You return to the granary tablet in hand, feeling every grainy weight of it. This lump of earth is becoming a partner in thought, a collaborator in memory. Behind you, the curious worker exclaims, "Hey, it makes counting easier." Others nod, relieved that someone, perhaps you, has found a way to stop losing track of barley every other week. As the afternoon light warms the clay, you press your stylized marks again, careful, steady, intentional. Each symbol deepens the boundary between forgetting and remembering. Something inside you knows this is only the beginning. The clay is speaking yes, but you are only just learning how to listen. The tablet dries slowly in the warmth of the courtyard, and you find yourself watching it the way someone watches a sleeping infant, half proud, half terrified to touch it again in case it breaks. But the day does not stop simply because you have begun bending clay toward meaning. No, Mesopotamia continues her ancient rhythm, tugging you into movement. Before long, a trader approaches, driving ahead of him a small herd of animals that behave like they've each been bribed with mischief. He gestures at the animals. "Count these for me," he says, already defensive, as though he expects an argument about whether one of the goats should actually count, since it keeps wandering off like it has an existential crisis. You sigh. This again. You glance down at the clay tablet in your hand. One triangular mark, one crude goat sign, 3 vertical strokes. It's a record, a snapshot of a moment. But it's also something more, a promise that memory no longer has to depend solely on trust. You kneel and grab fresh clay. It's cool, damp, full of grit. You shape it into a slab. The goats stomp around you, snorting their opinions. You start pressing marks. Goat sign quantity marks, a small dot in the corner to distinguish these goats from the other goats exchanged an hour ago. The trader watches, impressed. Is that official? You raise an eyebrow. It is now. He nods solemnly as though you've just invented bureaucracy, and he's reluctantly proud. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your thoughts before true writing emerged. Sumerians used clay counting tokens, simple geometric shapes that represented goods. A cone might represent a small measure of grain. A sphere might stand for a sheep. People stored these tokens in clay envelopes sealed tight. If someone wanted to verify a transaction, they had to break the envelope open and dump the pieces into their hands. Inconvenient, yes, but effective, until the system grew unwieldy. You turn the tablet over and press a few shapes on the back. Triangles, circles, wedges. The trader squints. Looks like a snack board. It's inventory, you correct him. He nods again, unsure but supportive in that deeply confused way only early adopters can be. But tokens alone cannot keep up with the expanding world. Already you see the problem. Too many items, too many shapes, too much clay needed to store every transaction. And the worst part, people keep losing the tokens. Yesterday, someone dropped an entire pouch into the river. The fish probably know more about temple accounting than the priests do. You walk toward the temple quarter, where the air grows still and serious. Clay bricks rise into geometric walls, corners, sharp shadows long even in daylight. A novice carries a stack of sealed clay envelopes past you. One falls, shatters, and hundreds of minute tokens scatter across the ground. Some roll into cracks, others into grass. You both stare at the tiny disaster. He whispers, horrified, "Those were the temple goats." You mutter, "Not anymore." You crouch beside the fragments and lift one of the tokens. It's small enough to swallow accidentally, which according to some fringe theories might have actually happened. Yes, a quirky tidbit flits through your mind. Some scholars suggest that losing tokens, whether by misplacement, destruction, or ingestion, may have forced the transition to pressing the tokens onto clay surfaces instead of storing them inside envelopes. Practicality meets panic, forging innovation. The novice trembles. You place a hand on his shoulder. "We don't need all of these," you say. "Watch." You take a fresh envelope, smooth its surface, and press the shapes of the scattered tokens onto the outside. "Now we don't have to open it," you explain. "We can see what's inside without breaking the seal." His eyes widen. "That's brilliant." You shrug modestly as though you didn't just revolutionize administrative history before lunch. Still, something stirs deeper than this trick. The pressed symbols don't represent actual objects, only the tokens that represent the objects. A copy of a copy. You tap the envelope thoughtfully. This can evolve. You know it. You feel it. You carry your new creation to the courtyard. Farmers unload sacks of barley, and as usual, disputes blossom like weeds. Two men argue over whether the barley is from the northern field or the western one, which apparently makes a difference because northern barley has more proud stalks, whatever that means. Voices rise, hands wave, tempers flare. You smooth clay again. This time you press not only the quantity marks, but also a simplified version of the barley stalk, just a few lines, but enough. Something in the argument shifts. Both men lean forward, intrigued by the silent clay adjudicator. One of them asks, "But how do we know which field?" You add a small diagonal line next to the barley symbol. "Arbitrary." "Yes, but agreed upon in that moment." A code is born in the dust of disagreement. Historians still argue whether early signs for barley beer, sheep, or land were standardized by temple officials or evolved slowly in each region before merging into a shared system. The evidence is a mosaic, fragments scattered like broken tokens on a courtyard floor. You can feel the uncertainty yourself as your fingers shape the next sign. Perhaps it was both a collective dream sculpted by many hands until it hardened into convention. You stand back examining your tablet. There it is, object-quantity distinction. A primitive sentence, though not yet a story. A passing woman carrying dates pauses. "You're making the clay gossip," she jokes. You smile. "Clay remembers better than people." She laughs. "So do donkeys, except they remember the wrong things." You nod, acknowledging the donkey across the yard that still hasn't forgiven you for blocking its path earlier. Fair enough. The afternoon heat thickens. Clay dries faster. You experiment with new shapes, circles flattened into ovals, lines bent at strange angles. Impressions made by reed cuttings. Every new mark makes the clay speak a little louder. You gather some of the earlier tokens and compare them to the new impressions. Something becomes clear: you no longer need the tokens at all. The mark itself is enough. A quiet thrill courses through you. This is the hinge of the world, the moment when counting stops being physical and becomes symbolic. Clay is no longer just earth. It is mind made tangible. You test your theory pressing marks for sheep jars, grain fish. The fish symbol looks accidentally like a sandal, but you keep it anyway. Mistakes sometimes create the best ideas. You add quantity strokes beside each. You arrange them in a row. For the first time, you step back and see it a line of symbols speaking in silence. Not tokens, not pictures, something in between, something becoming. A flock of birds passes overhead. You feel the same urgency they feel, the pull to move, to change, to survive. Counting the living world is no longer enough. Understanding it requires abstraction. You glance again at the temple novice, who now presses marks onto every envelope he carries. He beams at you with the zeal of someone who believes he has glimpsed the future. He has. You both have. You sit in the shade, shaping another tablet, letting your hands move instinctively. The clay warms against your skin. The world hums around you, animals bleating, workers calling someone, shouting about a missing basket that you suspect is currently being used as a hat by a child. You press another symbol. Simple, clean, intentional. The clay speaks again, and this time it remembers everything. You stay seated for a long moment, letting the warmth of the courtyard seep into your bones, but eventually the shifting shadows nudge you toward the temple. The granary might be the stomach of the settlement, but the temple is its restless mind, always hungry for records, offerings, obligations, debts, and the endless ebb and flow of human promises. You step into the long avenue leading toward the ziggurat, its stepped silhouette looming like a mountain forged from human certainty and divine uncertainty. As you walk, the air cools under tall walls decorated with painted reeds and horned crowns. The priests move in measured lines, whispering invocations that sound half administrative, half mystical. Incense wafts from a brazier, and you stifle a cough because the smoke always aims directly for your face, as if the gods enjoy practical jokes. The temple gatekeeper eyes the clay tablet in your hands. He lifts one eyebrow, not antagonistic, simply curious, as though trying to decide whether you're carrying a brilliant idea or a very confused brick. You nod respectfully and step past him. Inside the temple, corridors swallow sound. You feel the shift immediately. The granary hums with humanity. The temple breathes with the ambitions of something larger. Every surface holds some impression, a faded mural, a chipped inscription, a smoothed-out patch of wall where someone once leaned in prayer. The scent of barley cakes and lamp oil hangs in the dimness. Priests cluster around low tables covered with clay envelopes and counting tokens. Their arguments are quieter than those of traders, but no less intense. One man gestures at an envelope and says, "These were the offerings from the western orchards." Another insists they came from the south. A third, wearing an expression that suggests he hasn't slept in 2 nights, mutters, "Maybe if the gods wanted us to remember everything, they would give us better brains." You suppress a smile. Even sacred institutions suffer from mundane memory lapses. A mainstream historical fact unfurls in your thoughts. In early Sumer temples served as economic hubs, storing grain, managing fields, and overseeing complex redistributive systems. With no centralized currency offerings, and labor formed the backbone of temple-led society. Accounting wasn't a side task, it was the sacred glue holding the cosmic order together. You step closer and gently place your tablet on the table. The priests give you the same look you've seen on donkeys evaluating dangerous puddles, skeptical but interested. You show them the marks, barley symbol, quantity strokes, field identifier. One priest runs a finger lightly over the impressions as though checking whether they bite. "What does this say?" he asks. You explain slowly, showing how each symbol captures information normally swallowed by quarrels and faulty memory. A murmur ripples through the group. One priest leans closer, scrutinizing the clay as though it might begin reciting hymns. Another taps his forehead, muttering, "If clay can remember, perhaps we can finally sleep." You feel the shift, the subtle moment when practicality outweighs caution. One priest gestures for more clay. Another drags a low stool closer. Soon they all gather, pressing their own marks, comparing impressions, refining shapes. The temple begins to buzz in a new rhythm, the rhythm of externalized memory. And then from the far side of the hall, the high scribe approaches. He is slow, solemn, carrying an air of perpetual evaluation. His robe sways behind him like a cloud that hasn't decided whether to rain. He lifts your tablet carefully, not touching the symbols at first, simply observing them. Then he lowers it slightly, peering at you as if trying to determine whether you're a gift from the gods or a complication in human form. He asks only one question. Can these marks be taught? You feel your pulse quicken. This is the moment writing shifts from curiosity to necessity. You nod. The high scribe beckons you to follow. His chamber smells of oil lamps, clay dust, and something faintly herbal. Possibly the same concoction he gives apprentices to keep them awake during long nights of counting. He lays the tablet on a bench beside an enormous clay envelope filled with tokens. He cracks the envelope open. Tokens spill out like tiny bones of an exhausted system. You understand, he says, that tokens cannot handle what is coming. He gestures toward scrolls of administrative records stacked high, each tied with reed fibers. More fields, more livestock, more offerings, more workers, more of everything. His voice deepens. The gods demand order. And humans, he gives a tired smile. Humans demand mess. You snort softly, earning a quick side glance that suggests humor is tolerated only when it doesn't interrupt enlightenment. You watch him pick up one token, a small cone, and hold it between his fingers as though measuring its future. Then he presses it into a clay slab, leaving a clear impression. He places the token aside. He presses the symbol again, and again. If the mark stands for the token, he says, and the token stands for the thing, then the mark can stand for the thing. He meets your gaze. We no longer need these little shapes. A quirky tidbit pops into your mind. Some scholars theorize that these very tokens, once so central to accounting, became obsolete so quickly that within a few generations, people forgot why certain early symbols looked the way they did. The meaning of marks survived, but their origins became mystery. You realize you're living in the moment before that forgetting. The high scribe presses a new sign, simplified, sharp-edged, onto the clay. Cleaner, he mutters. Faster. The wedge of the reed stylus bites deeper. You feel the emergence of what future scholars will call cuneiform. You work beside him for hours. Together you simplify symbols, testing which shapes stay recognizable even when rushed. Rectangles flatten. Circles sharpen into angular impressions. Curved lines straighten. The clay no longer wants pictures, it wants efficiency. Outside the temple, bells ring for evening offerings. Shadows stretch long across the courtyard. The high scribe pauses and whispers, "Historians still argue whether writing was born from economic necessity or sacred tradition." He turns the tablet toward the fading light. But here, both bind together. You carry the freshly impressed slab into the main hall. The priests gather again. One of them, an older man with a voice like gravel steeped in honey, leans close and murmurs, "This will change everything." Then, after a beat, he adds, "But please make a mark for fish. I'm tired of arguing with fishermen. You shape a fish symbol that looks slightly eel-like, but everyone agrees it's good enough." The old priest beams. A victory. Night descends gently, curling around the ziggurat like a cloak. The lamps glow warm. You sit among the priests surrounded by clay and murmurs, and realize that temples need memory, not only to serve the gods, but to contain the ever-expanding chaos of human lives. And now, at last, they have it. And so do you. The clay waits. Your hands are ready. You wake before sunrise the next day, long before the temple bells stir the air. Something inside you pushes you back toward the workshop courtyard, a quiet insistence, like a half-remembered dream, tugging at your ribs. The clay tablets you and the priests created yesterday lie where you left them, each one carrying a whisper of the world outside, barley goats' offerings, debts. But today, as the cool morning breeze brushes your skin, you feel the clay demanding more than memory. It wants ambition. You kneel beside the drying tablets. Their surfaces have firmed into the color of early light, soft tan with the faint shimmer of mica here and there. You run your fingertips across the symbols. They feel alive, as though the impressions have begun thinking about themselves in the night. A worker enters quietly carrying a bundle of reeds. He nods to you, places the reeds down, and starts his tasks without asking questions. People have learned not to interrupt you when you stare intensely at dirt. Yesterday's arguments ended faster than usual. No one wants to break the spell. You select a fresh reed and trim its end into a sharp triangular point. The tool bites more cleanly than your thumb or the old wooden styluses. As the morning glows stronger, you begin experimenting again. The reed cuts fine lines into the clay, but you quickly notice a problem. Curved shapes resist the stylus. You try drawing a circle, and it collapses into an awkward oblong notch. You laugh under your breath. You've just rediscovered a truth: clay does not like curves. The first mark you press with the angled reed resembles a bird's footprint, a sharp wedge. Then another, and another. The shapes stack neatly, cleanly, without smudging. Faster, more efficient. The reed is teaching your hand what clay has wanted all along. As you test the tool, the high scribe approaches. He watches silently for a moment. Then he says, "The picture signs were too slow." You nod. "So the pictures must shrink." "Or vanish," he replies. This is the pivot point, the moment when pictures stop being pictures. Wedge after wedge sinks into the clay, forming symbols that increasingly look nothing like the objects they represent. Abstraction has begun. You sense it clearly. This is where proto-writing stretches itself toward sound, toward a new kind of expression. A mainstream historical fact brushes the edge of your thoughts. Early pictographs gradually transformed from visual representations into stylized signs, whose shapes no longer resembled the original objects. Over centuries, the bird no longer looked like a bird, the fish no longer swam across the tablet, and the head of a bull became an angular mark, barely hinting at horns. Today you feel the first breath of that transformation. As you carve another wedge, a young temple assistant arrives carrying a basket of offerings that smells unmistakably like goat cheese mixed with regret. He watches your marks and says, "That doesn't look like barley." "It isn't barley anymore," you say. "It's what stands for barley." He blinks. "Isn't that the same thing?" You smirk. "Not yet." "But it will be," he shrugs, unconcerned. He has bigger worries, like the particularly judgmental raven perched above the courtyard that has been watching him all morning. The bird tilts its head, perhaps wondering why humans suddenly prefer making little dents in dirt instead of doing sensible things like stealing shiny objects. You experiment with combining the wedge-shaped impressions. One wedge for head, another for water, a third for something you can only describe as "this shape is here because it feels right." You're no longer recording objects. You're recording ideas. Not pictures, but intentions. A fringe tidbit flickers into your mind. Some unusual tablets discovered far from the major cities show signs that may have been personal symbols, unique signatures, or even experimental attempts at capturing spoken sounds centuries earlier than mainstream writing. Whether those odd marks were the doodles of bored shepherds or the early sparks of phonetic writing is still debated, but they feel like distant cousins of your work today. The high scribe leans forward. "Show me that one again." You repeat the strokes. 2 wedges, then another, rotated slightly. This arrangement feels different. It doesn't represent barley or sheep or fish. It might stand for a task or an action, something not physical. Historians still argue whether early signs represented whole words, syllables, or concepts, he murmurs. Perhaps they did all of these at once. You can't help but grin. Why not? The temple courtyard begins to fill with morning voices. Priests chanting, workers sweeping, a merchant loudly insisting he absolutely did not forget last week's offering, despite clear evidence to the contrary. But even as the bustle grows, you and the high scribe stay focused on the clay, simplifying and sharpening symbol after symbol. The reed stylus answers your movements eagerly. It prefers swift, decisive pressure over slow drawing. Your hand adjusts to its rhythm. The slightest rotation changes the mark completely. Vertical wedge, horizontal wedge, diagonal wedge. The clay speaks more fluently now, as though the script is waking from a long sleep. A soft-footed priest carrying a tray of incense approaches. He examines your marks, squinting. "They look like bird tracks," he says. You reply, "These tracks lead to meaning." He nods with exaggerated wisdom. Everything is a track if you follow it long enough. Then he trips over a basket, sending incense pellets rolling everywhere. The raven caws mockingly. You do not comment. You continue experimenting, pressing sequences of wedges into patterns. The patterns begin to form clusters, almost like sentences, though still bound to the world of things, offerings, animals, rations, temple stores. But something new keeps tugging at you, ideas that cannot be touched, only thought. You press a mark for temple, then add another for worker, then shape a new sign, blending the two. Responsibility, perhaps. Obligation. A relationship captured in clay. This is dangerous territory, exciting territory. You can feel the moment stretching beyond counting, beyond representing objects. Writing is beginning to crave abstraction, the handling of invisible things. The high scribe whispers, "The gods will want their names in clay one day." You pause, the tip of the reed hovering over the tablet. The idea feels heavy, sacred, trembling with consequence. The gods whose voices echo through hymns and smoke, captured in the same clay that holds barley records. The world tilts for a moment. But before you can respond, a novice rushes in shouting, "The Western Orchard sent double offerings, or no offerings, or something in between." 3 contradictory reports arrive simultaneously. Perfect timing. You stand tablet in hand and follow the chaos. Inside the temple hall, farmers argue in overlapping voices. They try to describe what was sent, what was promised, what was received, but the words swirl like dust, impossible to fix. Until you take a new tablet and begin pressing symbols. One for orchard, one for quantity, one for the type of goods. The room quiets instantly, like children watching a magician. You add another mark, new experimental bold, that captures confirmation, the idea of something being verified. The farmers lean in. They nod, point agree. Something about seeing their words made visible settles them. Clay does what voices cannot. You realize with a shiver that pictures have grown teeth. They are no longer drawings of objects, but tools that shape the world. Outside, the sun climbs. Heat thickens. The raven finally leaves, disappointed by humanity's lack of spilled grain. But you remain rooted, reed stylus in hand, pressing wedge after wedge into the clay. And with each impression you feel the future gliding closer. You return to the courtyard after settling the orchard dispute, and for a moment you simply stand there staring at the reed stylus in your hand. It feels different now, not just a tool, but a key you've only begun to learn how to turn. You roll it between your fingers. Its triangular tip catches the light like a tiny blade. And suddenly you feel it. The stylus isn't just helping you make marks. It is changing the shape of thought itself. You kneel by a fresh slab of clay. It's cool and pliant, still holding its morning moisture. Your shadow falls across it in a long, soft curve, one of the last curves you'll see today, because clay has already made its preference abundantly clear. You press the stylus into the surface, not drawing, but stamping. The wedge sinks in clean and sharp, like a small arrow pointing to the future. You press another angled differently, then another. You rotate the stylus slightly, testing how small changes create entirely new shapes. You sense the clay approving the shift wedges fit together with surprising elegance, like tiny architectural beams forming a structure sturdy enough to hold meaning. A worker leans over your shoulder, squinting. Why does everything look pointy now? You answer without looking up. Because pointy works. He grunts, unconvinced but unwilling to argue with someone who has recently solved several village disputes with nothing but rectangles and triangles. You try a series of rapid presses, creating a line of wedges that catches the attention of the high scribe as he enters the courtyard. He watches your hands move. It's faster, he says softly. Much faster. And clearer, he adds, running a finger just above the marks. Less room for confusion. You nod. The stylus has transformed your pace. The clay responds instantly, eagerly, as though it has been waiting for centuries for humans to stop drawing little goats and start writing with purpose. A mainstream historical fact rises in your mind. The shift from pictographs to wedge-shaped impressions occurred when scribes adopted the reed stylus, whose angled tip naturally created the distinctive cuneiform wedges. Curves became impractical, lines straightened, symbols stylized, and a new script was born not from artistic choice, but from the physics of reeds and clay. As you press another mark, a gust of warm air stirs dust around you. A novice approaches holding a tablet with yesterday's more pictorial signs. Should we still use these, he asks. You look at the curved barley stalk, the round sheep head, the softly drawn fish. They already seem antiquated, like relics from an age where people tried too hard to draw the world instead of symbolizing it. No, you say gently. Not like that. He seems relieved. Drawing sheep was never his talent. The animals always ended up looking like large, hairy turnips with existential dread. You take the tablet from him and press a new wedge-shaped sign beside the old pictograph, then another to replace the old one entirely. He watches wide-eyed. So, the picture doesn't matter anymore. The picture matters, you reply, but only long enough to transform into something better. Back at the main table, the high scribe unrolls a thin reed mat and arranges several tablets you made yesterday. He places the pictorial signs beside your new wedge impressions, comparing them. The progression is unmistakable. What began as a bird becomes a cluster of angled wedges. What started as a fish becomes a horizontal series of impressions. What was once barley becomes a stylized shape, composed entirely of precise cuts. A fringe tidbit tickles the back of your mind. Some early cuneiform signs became so simplified that generations of scribes had no idea what the original pictograph looked like. They memorized signs the way a musician memorizes notes, not knowing the instrument that produced them. You feel yourself planting the seeds of that future. The high scribe clears his throat as two younger scribes approach. Watch closely, he instructs them. This is not drawing. This is cutting meaning from clay. You demonstrate slowly rotating the stylus, pressing wedges in a pattern that represents barley temple received. The scribes imitate you, some hesitantly, some too enthusiastically, as though trying to impress the gods with their speed. One presses too hard, causing the clay to squish outward dramatically. The high scribe sighs and mutters, "Historically inevitable perhaps, but still messy." Clay can be forgiven, you say diplomatically. Meanwhile, two workers nearby are arguing about a shipment of onions, specifically whether the onions were delivered yesterday or whether they're still on the way, which feels suspiciously like a euphemism for they were eaten. You take your tablet, press several wedge marks quickly, and hold it up. "Show me how many you tell them." One onion-stained worker points. You add quantity wedges beside the onion symbol. The other worker squints, pauses, and finally nods. "Yes," he says. "That's right." No shouting, you point out. No shouting, he agrees reluctantly. The stylus continues, revealing its brilliance. With it you can record faster than people can argue. You can press symbols that hold steady even when memories waver. You can carve permanence into the mud of fleeting lives. Historians still argue whether the wedge marks were inspired by earlier tools, by artistic preference, or by the needs of rapid accounting. But as you press one mark after another, you feel the answer in your bones. The tool shaped the writing. The writing shaped the thought. You rise to stretch your back. A child runs past chasing a chicken, both of them equally confused about the goal. The high scribe chuckles quietly, one of the rare moments he allows himself such indulgence. Writing is becoming its own creature, he says. You nod. It's learning to walk. And soon, he muses, it will run. You feel the truth of that. The speed of the stylus changes everything. No longer tied to curves and detailed depictions, the script can expand. It can capture more ideas, more relationships, more abstractions. This marks the beginning of something enormous, something that will eventually cradle laws, hymns, stories, and the dreams of empires. You sit again. Stylus in hand, clay before you. With quiet reverence you press a new sequence of wedges, neat, deliberate, confident. The clay accepts them easily, holding them like secrets too important to lose. And just as the sun reaches its peak, you feel it fully. The stylus has changed everything. Not only the marks, not only the speed, it has changed the entire direction of human expression. The future now fits in the palm of your hand, sharp, clean, and wedge-shaped. The courtyard empties slowly as noon heat thickens in the air, but you remain seated at the low table stylus poised above a fresh slab of clay. The world is hazy, shimmering around the edges, as though the city itself is holding its breath. Something is beginning, something subtle, invisible, yet powerful enough to bend the trajectory of human thought. You press the first wedge, then another, then a third. They line up neatly like soldiers awaiting orders. And in that quiet moment, you notice something astonishing. These marks no longer feel like simple tallies or labels. They are starting to behave. They arrange themselves in patterns. They pull at one another. They suggest relationships. You rotate the stylus and add a wedge angled differently, an indicator, a modifier. It sits beside the others with elegant precision, giving the group new meaning, hinting at an action rather than an object. A scribe watching from the shade tilts his head. What does that say? You pause. The symbols aren't just listing goods. They're doing something more. It says, "The temple gives barley to the workers." Is that a thing, Clay can say? He asks, incredulous. It is now. He stares at the marks as though they've grown tiny legs and started dancing. The high scribe approaches, drawn by the stir of curiosity, and examines the new arrangement. You feel the weight of his gaze settle like dusk. You are ordering the signs, he murmurs, not just placing them. You swallow. I think they want to be ordered. He chuckles softly, amused by the notion of clay having desires. But you feel it deep and insistent. The script is pushing past objects toward actions, structures, relationships. Clay is becoming a stage on which events can play out. A mainstream historical fact rises to your mind early. Cuneiform evolved from pictographs into a partially grammatical system, allowing scribes to express not just things but actions. Rudimentary verbs, possessives, roles, and relationships. Clay began to capture the invisible threads connecting people, goods, and events. You press another cluster of marks, simple, clean. Temple. Worker, grain. The ordering of these signs tells a story, however small. The high scribe studies them intently. Historians still argue whether early Sumerian grammar emerged intentionally or accidentally, he says, quietly. But here, it feels inevitable. The murmuring temple courtyard breaks suddenly with laughter. One of the priests has dropped an entire jar of date syrup, and now several apprentices are slipping across the floor like startled fish. You try not to grin, but one apprentice glides past you so dramatically that you nearly add a symbol for oops onto the clay. When the chaos subsides, the high scribe gestures for you to follow him into the records hall. The hall is dim, cool, fragrant with ancient dust. Shelves stretch upward, each filled with clay envelopes, tablets, and tokens, hundreds, perhaps thousands. You feel as though you've stepped into the collective memory of generations. The high scribe lifts a clay envelope, presses one stylized wedge mark onto its surface, and then places it back. That means completed. Does it, you ask? It does now, he replies. You realize what he's doing, assigning grammatical functions. A single wedge placed above or beside another sign can determine whether it's the subject, the object, or the action. Clay grammar, clay logic. You let your fingers trail over the tablet shelves. Every mark here is a captured thought, some clear, some muddled, some preserved out of habit rather than usefulness. But they all share the same truth. Memory has left the body and entered the world. A fringe tidbit floats into your mind. One some scribes whisper about during late-night practice. Certain early tablets contain lines that appear to be exercises in ordering signs, almost like drill saws. Some scholars speculate these were the first grammar lessons, though others think they might simply be bored apprentices doodling patterns. You imagine ancient students groaning as teachers demanded they rewrite the same combination 24 times. Some things never change. You and the high scribe sit together, shaping clay and testing the boundaries of expression. You create a mark for giver and then another for receiver. The difference is subtle, an angle here, a placement there, but it changes everything. With these distinctions, you can describe not just what exists, but who does what to whom. You feel a tremor of awe. Writing is starting to capture reality in layers. Outside the hall, the sound of a dispute rises again. You sigh, sensing yet another argument nearing your doorstep. You step out to find two merchants quarreling fiercely, one claiming he lent grain months ago, the other insisting the debt was repaid through labor. You press fresh marks into a tablet as they argue. Giver, grain, owed, time. You add a small wedge to indicate future, something you and the high scribe have been experimenting with. The marks appear ordinary, but their implications ripple through the dispute. The merchants fall silent as you show them the tablet. You read the marks aloud, and something shifts. They concede, not because you have decided, but because the clay has spoken. Grammar has given authority to the written word. Clay adjudicates better than memory. A passing child watches this unfold, then whispers to his friend, "Clay has power now." You try not to look too dramatic when you respond. It always did. We just learned to listen. The afternoon deepens. You work through several more tablets, refining marks for is, was, belongs to, given, taken, sent, and owed. Some work beautifully, others fall apart like poorly baked bread. You laugh at your failures, particularly the mark meant to represent and which currently resembles an irritated insect. The high scribe massages his temples. If we keep adding grammar, the scribes will revolt. Let them, you say. Language is worth the trouble. He gives you a long, thoughtful look. You speak as though you're shaping the bones of the world. You exhale slowly. No. The bones were already here. We're just learning to see them. Later, as the sun dips low, you sit alone in the courtyard again. Clay dust clings to your fingertips, marking you as unmistakably as the symbols you press. You make one final sequence of wedges before nightfall, 3 signs in an order that feels almost like a sentence. A sentence. You stare at it until the shadows swallow the edges of the tablet. Writing is learning to behave, to structure thought, to capture meaning not just in pieces but as a whole. This is the moment language leaves the mouth and enters the world, and you are the quiet breath guiding it forward. By the time dawn spills over the rooftops the next morning, you are already awake, standing in the threshold of the temple courtyard. The clay tablets from yesterday rest in a tidy cluster, their sharp-edged marks catching the early light like embers. You feel a strange reverence toward them, as if each tablet were a sealed jar containing the breath of the world. But today, a different kind of sound fills the air, not the familiar bustle of workers, nor the half-sung prayers of priests. Instead, you hear the clipped, purposeful steps of officials. Their voices are hushed, too hushed for an ordinary morning. Something is happening. You follow the sound toward the administrative hall, where a gathering has begun. 2 merchants, both important enough to wear finely woven cloaks, stand stiffly before a low table. A small crowd observes from behind the pillars, scribes, priests, workers. Even the temple cat has paused, tail flicking with judgment. The high scribe notices you and gestures you forward. "Come," he says quietly. "Your marks are needed. You approach and see the problem immediately." The 2 merchants traded large shipments of grain and dates weeks ago, but neither recorded the exchange clearly. Each claims the other owes payment. Their voices grow sharp, their hands animated. If not for temple decorum, they'd be shouting like children fighting over a stick. You glance at the empty clay slab on the table. Fresh. Waiting. A faint smile touches your lips. Of course, you press your stylus to the clay. Merchant A, grain. Merchant B, dates. Exchange. Witnesses. Date. Completed. The symbols fall into place, neat and decisive. You add the markers you and the high scribe developed, one indicating giver, another receiver, another for verified. The room quiets. Even the merchants grow still. The high scribe lowers his voice. "Read it." You recite the marks aloud, and suddenly the dispute dissolves. The merchants nod, resigned but relieved. The tablet settles the matter more cleanly than memory or oath. One of them mutters, "Clay is fairer than men." The other rubs his chin and says, "Perhaps fairer than the gods." You pretend not to hear that last part for your own sake. A mainstream historical fact flickers in your awareness: the earliest administrative uses of cuneiform empowered officials, merchants, and city rulers to manage complex economic obligations with unprecedented precision. Writing didn't just record transactions, it enforced them. And now you see it happening around you. The high scribe taps the fresh tablet. "Power sits lightly on clay," he murmurs, "but heavily on those who press it." You feel the weight of that truth settle in your chest. Writing isn't merely a convenience, it is becoming a tool of authority. A force that can shape agreements, resolve conflicts, and grant legitimacy to words. Before you can dwell on it, a palace steward hurries in breathless. "The governor requests writing," he announces. "For the labor ledgers." Of course he does. You follow the steward across the bustling courtyard, past the ziggurat's shadow, stretching like a giant's fingertip across the earth. The governor's chambers overlook the city streets where workers prepare for a new construction project, a canal extension, by the look of the piles of tools and the frustrated expressions. Inside, the governor sits with a posture suggesting he hasn't slept in 3 days. He gestures impatiently. They say you can fix the mess. You glance at the heaping stack of clay envelopes beside him. Many are cracked, broken, or so worn that the symbols have faded into lumps. Tokens spill across the floor like lost pebbles. You pick one up and roll it between your fingers, thinking of how quickly it became obsolete. Write, the governor commands. I want each laborer's name, each task, each hour. No more confusion, no more disputes. You sit in Hale and begin pressing marks names first, stylized personal signs you've begun experimenting with. Then roles, then tasks, quantities, deadlines, witnesses. The wedges flow like water. Clay listens, absorbs, obeys. The governor watches in silent awe. This, he says, gives me control. You answer carefully. This gives you clarity. He smiles, but it is the smile of someone who hears only the word he prefers. A quirky fringe tidbit drifts into your mind. Some fragments uncovered centuries later suggest that early kings and officials may have used writing to exaggerate their accomplishments, recording achievements grander than reality or omitting failures entirely. Whether these embellishments were intentional propaganda or enthusiastic clerical errors remains unclear. But watching the governor's satisfied expression, now you sense how easily writing can become a mirror that flatters its holders. As you finish the tablet and set it aside, workers file in to receive their task assignments. They study the marks with curiosity and mild suspicion. One murmurs, "So Clay decides where we dig now?" You answer gently, "No." But Clay remembers what is decided. That seems to comfort them. Somewhat. The high scribe who followed quietly leans close to you. Historians still argue whether writing created bureaucracy or bureaucracy created writing, he whispers. But today, at least, I am convinced they feed each other. Outside, the workers begin moving with new purpose. Tools clink, voices rise. The governor stands taller, assured that his orders will no longer drift away on the wind. Writing has given structure to power structure that cannot be denied, forgotten, or conveniently reinterpreted. You leave the palace and wander back toward the temple, feeling the weight of the day pressing on your shoulders. People greet you with a mix of admiration and apprehension. You are no longer just someone who shapes clay. You are someone who shapes what is true. You pause at the edge of the courtyard and watch 2 scribes copying your wedge mark sequences onto new tablets. They work with intense concentration, brows furrowed, styluses moving in careful rhythm. Writing is no longer yours alone. It is becoming everyone's. A breeze stirs the reed mats. Clay dust floats, shimmering like tiny stars. You sit and carve one final sequence into a waiting tablet, word order, record lore. The stylus presses deeper than usual, leaving marks that feel destined for permanence. Power in a soft tablet. Authority born from mud. And you sit in the center of it, the clay whispering under your hands as the world begins to change. The morning arrives, wrapped in a soft, pearly mist, the sort that blurs rooftops and makes the ziggurat look like it's rising out of a dream. You walk through the temple courtyard, feeling the familiar crunch of dry clay fragments beneath your sandals. But today, instead of heading toward the administrative hall, you follow the sound of chanting voices drifting from the far side of the complex, the training yard. Scribal apprentices are already gathered there, kneeling on woven reed mats. Their backs are straight, their palms resting on their thighs in strained imitation of calm. Clay tablets lie before them like sleeping beasts. And as you approach, a few of the students glance your way with the wide-eyed awe people usually reserve for storms, miracles, or the improbable sight of a goat behaving. The high scribe stands at the front of the yard, hands clasped behind him. When he sees you, he gestures subtly. "Sit with them," he says. "They will learn from watching you work." You settle among the apprentices. They shift, nervous. One whispers, "That's the one who made the tablets settle the grain dispute." Another mutters, "And the labor ledgers." A third adds, "And the onion fiasco." You smile because apparently that incident has become a legend. The high scribe clears his throat. Today, he announces, we begin teaching the hand to remember. A hush falls over the group. You watch the apprentices pick up their styluses, some gripping them like delicate feathers, others clutching them as if preparing for battle. The high scribe demonstrates the basic wedge stroke, pressing it cleanly into the clay. Then he nods for the students to mimic him. The first attempts are enthusiastic, if nothing else. One student presses so hard he leaves a crater. Another produces wedges so faint they practically evaporate. A third somehow manages to draw what looks suspiciously like a startled duck. You gently adjust the hand of the nearest student. Not too hard, you whisper. Let the clay take the mark. Don't force it. He exhales shakily. The clay hates me, he confesses. You shake your head. Clay hates no one. It only reflects your impatience. It's meant to sound wise, but judging by his bewildered expression, he's still convinced the clay is holding a personal grudge. A mainstream historical fact hums in your thoughts. Scribal schools, known later as edubus, were rigorous institutions where students copied signs, lists, and lexical tables for years before mastering the script. Training was long, disciplined, repetitive. Every scribe earned their skill through thousands of hours pressed into clay. The high scribe begins assigning exercises. Write the sign for barley, he commands. The students try. Some barley signs look like grain, others look like strangely shaped insects. Then comes the sign for temple, then worker, then ration. Sweat gathers on brows. Clay dust settles on robes. A few students groan quietly, prompting the high scribe to glare until they straighten up like reeds in a storm. You move from student to student, correcting angles, adjusting grip, demonstrating strokes. The stylus becomes an extension of your fingers, responding instinctively. One apprentice stares at your hands with something like suspicion. "How do your marks always look the same?" he asks. You smile. "Practice." He sighs dramatically. "I was hoping for a secret technique. There is one, you say, leaning closer. It's called practice." He groans louder. From the shade of a nearby wall, a group of temple workers watches. One mutters to another, "These scribes are the future." The other responds, "They better be. They're terrible at hauling grain." You pretend you didn't hear that. As the morning deepens, the exercises grow more complex. Now the students must combine signs, temple gives grain. Many struggle with order. Symbols end up jumbled, reversed, or floating in random clusters like confused fish. One apprentice proudly presents a tablet that accidentally reads, "The grain gives the temple." You resist the urge to laugh. "Remember," you say gently, "the world has structure. Let the signs reflect it." He tries again, brow furrowed, sculpting the meaning back into place. A fringe tidbit surfaces in your awareness. Clay tablets uncovered at ancient school sites often contain personal notes, scribbles like, "I'm tired," or "The teacher is angry again," mixed among the official exercises. These ancient complaints show that students have always been the same, regardless of the century. You glance at one student who is quietly carving a tiny picture of a fish in the corner of his tablet. You whisper, "We're not drawing anymore." He jumps. "But it's a very good fish." "It is, you admit. But save it for after class." He covers it sheepishly with his hand. By midday, the courtyard rings with the soft, rhythmic tapping of styluses. The pattern is soothing, almost musical. You close your eyes and let the sound wash over you. Tap, tap, press. Tap meaning unfolding one wedge at a time. But training the scribal hand is only half the task. Training the scribal mind is the harder part. A young apprentice raises his hand tablet, trembling in his grasp. "Why must we learn so many signs that look nearly the same?" he asks. You take the tablet gently, because small changes create new meanings, you explain. And meaning is delicate. It must be shaped with care. Another student mutters, "Feels like the signs multiply overnight." Historians still argue whether early scribes expanded the sign system intentionally. The high scribe interjects, or whether complexity simply grew from necessity. He gestures toward the students. You are part of that necessity. Afternoon heat settles over the yard. The apprentices, exhausted but determined, begin the final exercise of the day, copying a short sequence you composed earlier. Simple, clear, grammatical. Temple. Worker. Barley. Ode. Returned. They lean over their tablets, pressing carefully. Sweat drips from foreheads. Clay softens slightly under the touch. But the marks appear slowly, faithfully. Writing is taking hold. When the last student finishes, the high scribe inspects each tablet. He pauses over one with a long crack down the center. "What happened here?" he asks sternly. The student gulps. "I dropped it. Was it an accident?" "Yes." Then next time the high scribe says, "Drop a smaller tablet." The apprentices laugh quietly but genuinely. Even the high scribe smiles, rare as an eclipse. As the day draws to a close, you gather the cracked, uneven, earnest tablets. They may not be perfect, but they are the first steps in a long lineage. Every scribe who will ever carve a law, a hymn, a myth, every one of them begins here, sweating under the sun, trying to remember whether the barley sign points left or right. You sit for a moment after the students leave, listening to the silence settling like dust. Your hands ache pleasantly. Clay stains the creases of your fingers, marking you as unmistakably as any title or crown. Teaching the hand that remembers is slow work. Humbling work. Necessary work. Because writing is no longer just your creation. It is becoming a craft, a profession, a lineage. And these students, tired, clumsy, determined, will carry it into futures you cannot yet imagine. Night drapes itself slowly across the city, spilling into the alleys and courtyards like dark ink. You're still sitting in the training yard long after the last apprentice has gone smoothing the surface of a fresh clay tablet with the back of your hand. You tell yourself you're preparing for tomorrow's lessons, but in truth, something else calls to you, something older, deeper, woven into the breath of this land. You stand tablet in hand and walk toward the inner sanctuary of the temple. The walls glow dimly with lamplight. Incense thickens the air, carrying a resinous sweetness that clings to your throat. As you pass beneath carved lintels, you feel the hush around you shift into something more ancient than administration, more intimate than accounting. The priests inside the sanctuary are chanting. Their voices rise and fall like oars dipping into water. Before them on a low stone table lies a collection of tablets, far older than anything you've shaped. Early pictographs, incantations, ritual formulas written in tentative hands. These tablets tremble with a different kind of meaning, one that feels less like memory and more like negotiation with the hidden forces of the world. A priest notices you and beckons. "Come," he whispers. "Sit. The gods also need scribes." You lower yourself onto a woven mat, feeling the weight of the clay tablet in your lap. The priest continues chanting. The rhythm sinks into your bones, steady as heartbeat, strange as dream. You close your eyes briefly, imagining the night sky pressing down, vast, unknowable, threaded with omens. When the chant ends, the high priest bows his head. Then he gestures to a set of older tablets. These preserve the words of storms, he says quietly. Words the sky once whispered to our ancestors. You examine them gently. The symbols are different, less regular, less structured. They waver between picture and sign, as though unsure whether they are meant for the human world or the divine. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your mind. Early cuneiform tablets often contained incantations, blessings, and rituals, tying writing to magic medicine and cosmic interpretation. For the ancients, writing was not merely a tool, it was a veil lifted between worlds. The high priest points to one broken tablet. Read it, he instructs. You try. The symbols are archaic, their meanings layered like sediment. The tablet speaks of a night wind that sneaks into dreams to rearrange their order. It warns that if a dream repeats 3 times, the gods are sending a message. You smile faintly. If dreams repeat 3 times in your world, it usually means someone ate suspicious cheese before bed. But here, nothing is humorous. Dream omens matter. Storms speak. Shadows hint at fate. The high priest asks you to rewrite the cracked text onto fresh clay. You hesitate. The older signs are clumsy, looping, difficult to press with your wedge-shaped stylus. But you try. You adapt them, tightening the angles, straightening the lines, wedging the curves into compliance. Slowly, the ancient incantation becomes clearer, more precise. You feel something shift. Writing itself is being invited to step into the realm of myth and magic. A fringe tidbit stirs in your thoughts. Some tablets found centuries later contain personal prayers, scribbled secretly in corners, pleas to gods for luck, for protection, even for love. One even contains a line that scholars think might be the world's first recorded complaint about a neighbor's noisy donkey. You look at your new tablet and add a tiny mark in the margin, just a dot, nothing more, where the old text was too damaged to recover. A scribe's note, you whisper. A sign of honesty. The high priest nods approvingly. Suddenly, a young priest rushes in clutching a bundle of twigs. A bad omen, he says breathlessly. Owls circled the temple 3 times at dusk. The room tightens. Owls in many Sumerian traditions are messengers of the underworld. The high priest orders a divination ritual immediately. You're swept along with the others into a smaller chamber where an oil lamp burns with a trembling blue flame. They ask you to write the omen on clay, night owl 3 warning. You press the symbols quickly, efficiently. The priests interpret the tablet as though it were a direct report from another realm. In their hands, your writing becomes prophecy. A chill runs across your spine. Language has stepped far beyond lists and ledgers tonight. As the priests deliberate, they ask you to assist with another task, copying sections of a long ritual hymn from a fragile old tablet. The hymn speaks of the goddess Inanna descending into the underworld of gates and judges and forgotten memories. The rhythm is beautiful, haunting. You press each wedge carefully, feeling the story unwind beneath your stylus like a spool of cosmic silk. Historians still argue whether mythic texts were written for ritual use, for teaching, or merely because scribes wanted to preserve their favorite stories. But in this dim chamber, watching priests chant while inhaling incense, heavy enough to make even the donkey outside drowsy, you sense the truth. Myths survive because people breathe them, speak them, write them. Again and again. A soft voice interrupts your thoughts. One of the priests, hardly older than the apprentices you trained, sits beside you. He asks shyly, "Can writing capture what we dream? Or what we fear?" You consider. Writing captures what we can shape, you say. dreams and fears. Try anyway. He smiles faintly. Then perhaps writing is braver than we are. You continue copying until your hand aches and the lamps gutter low. The priests disperse at last, satisfied that their omens have been recorded and their rituals preserved. You step outside, blinking into the cool night. Stars prick the sky in tight clusters. Somewhere in the dark, an owl hoots almost mockingly. You mutter, "Don't start and keep walking." Writing dreams and the divine feels different from writing barley or workers or quantities. It feels like dipping your stylus into the unseen, pressing wedges into the silence between worlds. You return to your room tablet still warm in your hands. Before sleeping, you scratch one final mark into the clay, a symbol that means listen. Because tonight, as myth and memory braided together, you realized something profound. Writing doesn't merely describe the world, it dares to speak to it. Dawn returns in soft gold, brushing the temple walls with a light so gentle it feels almost apologetic for disturbing your sleep. You step into the courtyard, slowly stretching the stiffness from your shoulders. The previous night's chants still hum faintly in your skull, like echoes from a dream you're not sure you were meant to overhear. But today, as you walk past the drying tablets of rituals and omens, you sense a different kind of anticipation in the air. The apprentices are already awake, muttering among themselves, practicing wedges on scraps of clay. A few gesture excitedly at one tablet in particular, the one you copied from a fragment of the Inanna hymn. They touch the marks with reverence, whispering its lines as though the story warms them from within. It hits you then stories are starting to settle into the clay. Not just records, not just rituals, but narratives, the breath of human experience shaped into sequences of marks. The high scribe approaches carrying a scroll of reed fiber notes. "Come," he says softly. "It's time." You follow him through the corridors toward the royal quarter, where the palace walls catch the early light like polished stone. The governor has summoned you both, but this time there are no labor disputes, no grain arguments, no ledgers in disarray. Instead, he greets you with a smile. "We are preparing a tale," he announces, "an account of the king's journey to the western marshes. A grand success, naturally." His tone suggests that the definition of success may be flexible. "We want it written properly." Ah, that kind of tale. You sit before a wide clay slab while scribes gather behind you. The governor speaks in a rolling cadence, describing the expedition. The king's crossing of the river, his audience with local chieftains, the gifts exchanged, the speeches delivered. He embellishes liberally. The high scribe occasionally raises an eyebrow, but says nothing. You begin pressing signs. At first, the tablet feels like a familiar administrative record, king journey, marsh gifts tribute. But as the governor continues, something begins to shift. His voice weaves description, emotion, triumph, tension. You realize that this cannot be told as a plain list. It demands shape, rhythm, movement. For the first time, you use the wedge marks to capture not only what happened, but how it felt. You craft sequences of signs that evoke travel, challenge, arrival. You emphasize key moments by repeating symbols. You stretch a pause by spacing the marks apart. You mirror the governor's cadence with the pattern of your stylus. A scribe whispers behind you, awe threading his voice. It reads like a story. You don't look up, but you smile. A mainstream historical fact occurs to you over time. Cuneiform evolved beyond administrative record-keeping and became a medium for literature, producing epics, dialogues, laments, hymns, and historical narratives, culminating centuries later in works like the Epic of Gilgamesh. You feel the stirrings of that future now inside this room that suddenly smells less like bureaucracy and more like imagination. The governor finishes speaking at last. He leans forward to inspect the tablet, nodding approvingly, even though he can't read the signs. "Good," he says. "Let people see the greatness of our king." You resist the temptation to note that half the embellishments never happened. Instead, you press a final sign at the lower edge completed. The high scribe collects the tablet and carries it off to the drying room. You step outside for air, inhaling deeply. Clay dust rides the morning breeze. Somewhere beyond the temple walls, someone is shouting about a runaway goat. Life in its chaotic glory continues. But stories pause the world for a moment. You return to the courtyard where the apprentices gather eagerly around you. One thrusts a tablet into your hands. "We tried to write a story too," he says, "about a fisherman and a giant turtle." The tablet's marks are a jumble, some out of order, others repeated excessively. But there is undeniable intention: fisherman, river, turtle, struggle, victory. You grin. "Let's fix the order you suggest," and the apprentices cluster closer, listening with bright eyes. You rearrange the signs. You start with the fisherman, you say, because he's the one who acts first. They nod. Then the river, because that's the setting. Nods again. Then the turtle. Perhaps large, you add, pressing the modifier wedge. One apprentice laughs. "It was enormous." Then you show what happened. Struggle, movement, outcome. You repress a sequence, making it flow. They stare at the tablet as though you've performed sorcery. But really, you think writing is becoming a vessel for story logic. A fringe tidbit bubbles to the surface. Some ancient tablets uncovered later contain early wisdom literature, short stories, fables, even proto-proverbs about stubborn animals or foolish men. Scholars debate whether these were teaching tools or entertainment. Watching the apprentices clutching their turtle story with pride, you feel the answer leaning toward both. You spend the rest of the morning teaching them narrative order. It's less rigid than grammar, more fluid, shaped by instinct and memory. The apprentices struggle but joyfully, and sometimes they slip an accidental joke into their clay like a sign sequence that reads entirely by accident. "The turtle insulted the fisherman." You admit quietly that you like that version better. Later, in the shade of a date palm, the high scribe joins you. He examines the turtle story tablet and gives a long, contemplative hum. "Writing wants stories," he says at last. You look at him. "Do you think so?" He nods. "Lists and ledgers keep the world orderly. But stories keep the world awake." You lean back against the tree trunk, listening to the rustle of its leaves. Beyond the courtyard, through a slit between buildings, you see the afternoon sky turning pale and wide. The high scribe adds softly, "Historians still argue whether literature began as entertainment instruction or sacred memory. But here right now, I see only one thing clearly." "What's that?" you ask. "That humans don't want only to live their lives," he says. "They want to remember them, and to be remembered." His words settle deep. You lift your stylus and trace a small line in the dirt. No meaning, just movement. What will writing become, you wonder aloud. The high scribe touches one of the apprentice's story tablets. Whatever humans need it to be. You glance around the clay, the styluses, the students, the priests, the governor's embellished tale, the sacred hymns, the fisherman's battle with a turtle too bold for its own good. Stories find new breath, and with each breath you feel writing stretching its wings, learning the shape of narrative. As the sun begins to descend, you gather the tablets and carry them inside. The world is ready, more ready than it knows, to carve its stories into the waiting clay. Tonight you think there will be new tales to write, and tomorrow even more. The next morning dawns quietly. Too quietly. You step out of your chamber, expecting to hear the usual chorus of merchants arguing, apprentices complaining, donkeys making their feelings known, and priests chanting their dawn invocations. Instead, The temple complex hums with a different energy, focused, fast-moving, purposeful. People rush past you carrying stacks of tablets, baskets of clay reed mats, styluses, buckets of water. Something is happening. You follow the commotion toward the northern wing of the temple, the archive halls. These corridors are usually calm, cool, and dust-scented, tended by a handful of dedicated scribes who move with the slow reverence of gardeners tending fragile seedlings. But today, the air vibrates with activity. The moment you enter the main archive chamber, you understand why. A scribe spots you and waves urgently. "More tablets," he says. "The new room is nearly full, and we've barely started sorting." You blink. "New room, come. You must see." He leads you deeper into the archives, past shelves lined with tablets, past niches filled with clay envelopes, so old their surfaces have softened into ghostly shapes, past alcoves where fragments lie in careful piles awaiting repair. You feel the weight of centuries around you, humbling and heavy. At last you reach a freshly cleared chamber. The walls are bare, the floor is covered with reed mats, but the real sight is the mountains of clay tablets stacked from floor to waist administrative lists. Ritual texts, story tablets from the apprentice's palace, records labor tallies, grain inventories, debt settlements, omen reports, hymn fragments. The sheer volume steals your breath. You whisper, "All of this. In 1 year?" The scribe laughs grimly. "Oh no, this is only from the last 3 months. You stare at him. He shrugs. Humans have discovered they like writing. A mainstream historical fact flits into your mind as cities such as Uruk grew, their archives expanded exponentially, containing tens of thousands of clay tablets across administrative, legal, religious, educational, and literary categories. Temples and palaces became vast libraries that required whole teams of scribes to organize. A second fact arrives right behind it, less comforting. Clay tablets multiply like locusts when bureaucracy thrives. You kneel, lifting one of the tablets. It's an administrative ledger from a canal project, your work from a few days ago. Beside it lies a hymn to the goddess Ninhursag. Beside that, a half-finished story about a boy who tried to swim across the river and ended up befriending a talking fish. The handwriting suggests an apprentice. The variety astonishes you. Writing has flooded the world. "Come," the scribe urges again. "We need your help with the classification." The task sounds simple. It is not. For the next several hours, you join dozens of scribes in sorting tablets, placing grain lists together. Tax tallies, adjacent ritual texts in another corner. Stories in yet another. But the tablets outpace your efforts. Every few minutes, new ones arrive from the palace, the granary, the training yard, the workshops, the governor's office, the temple kitchens, even from a fisherman who insists his grandson's turtle story deserves permanent preservation. You examine one tablet that reads, "Goat missing. Suspected theft. Goat described as extremely clever." You sigh. Who accepted this as official record? The nearest scribe shrugs helplessly. "People bring everything to us now. They think writing solves all problems. Well, you mutter writing solves some problems and creates new ones." Behind you, the high scribe appears, robes fluttering slightly as though he's been rushing. He surveys the chaos with a mixture of pride and dread. This, he says, is the price of memory. A young apprentice hurries up, arms full of more tablets. "Where do we put the omen records?" "South shelf," the high scribe replies. The apprentice hesitates. "Which south shelf?" "They are all south shelves." The high scribe pinches the bridge of his nose. "We need a better system." You glance around at the overwhelming flood of clay. "We need more than that," you reply. "We need organization that doesn't depend on knowing the room as well as our own stomachs." He frowns thoughtfully. "Explain." You take a tablet and press a new symbol at the top, a simple arrangement of wedges that can indicate a category. Another mark for subcategory. Another for date. Then you press a final wedge to show the tablet's location within the room. The high scribe stares. Clay catalogue. A way to make the library remember itself, you say? He nods slowly. Good, very good. A fringe tidbit enters your mind in later millennia. Temples in Mesopotamia would use catalogue tablets, lists of tablets, shelves, and subjects to keep track of their vast collections. Many of these catalogue tablets survive today, offering glimpses into the earliest library systems in history. As you and the high scribe begin marking and sorting, the room's frenzy softens into structure. Tablets fall into place. Categories emerge. Offerings, labor ritual. Omens, literary correspondence, taxation. Legal. The library begins to breathe with order instead of chaos. But just as calm settles, a scribe hurries in carrying a cracked tablet. This one is broken, he says. What do we do? The high scribe gestures to you. You kneel examining the fracture. The top half contains a story about a hunter who chases a lion. The bottom half contains a list of temple poultry. You try very hard not to laugh. If stories and poultry cross again, you say, we will never hear the end of it. You repair the tablet as best you can, pressing fresh clay into the cracks. Re-impressing symbols, salvaging the story while gently removing the poultry list to a separate slab. A child wanders in carrying yet another tablet. Mama says this needs to go in the place where dreams go, he announces. You blink. Dreams, he hands you the tablet. It contains a personal dream report. I saw a river of fire and my uncle riding a donkey over it. You inhale, exhale, and decide this must belong to the omen shelf. The high scribe watches you with faint amusement. This is knowledge, he says. Messy, growing, alive. Around you the archive buzzes quietly now, not frantic but industrious, purposeful. Tablets slide into their shelves like seeds into soil. The library expands, reorganizes, reshapes itself. It becomes slowly but surely a living organism, breathing, learning, remembering. A mainstream historical fact returns to you. Sumerian archives weren't only repositories, they were workplaces, classrooms, creative labs, places where learning and memory intertwined. The people who tended them weren't storage clerks, they were knowledge keepers. You pick up one last tablet. It's small, smooth, beautifully written. The signs say, a story about a man who never wanted to forget. You smile. You place it carefully on the literary shelf. The library doesn't sleep. Not anymore. And as you leave the archives, clay dust trailing from your feet like the footprints of thought, you feel a certainty settle into you. Writing has become a home for memory, and memory once unleashed will only keep expanding. The next morning arrives carrying the smell of distant rain, though the sky remains stubbornly clear, a pale blue stretched tight over the horizon. You step into the courtyard, expecting the usual rhythm of temple life, but today the air feels foreign. Not unfriendly, not tense, simply different. As though the wind has carried unfamiliar thoughts across the desert overnight. And then you see them. A caravan is arriving at the city gates. Tall donkeys and thick-fleeced sheep carts covered with dyed cloth, men and women, wearing clothing stitched in styles you've never seen. Their accents carry strange melodies. Their gestures trace different shapes in the air. They approach the temple with an air of formality, as though they've rehearsed this moment for days. Foreigners. You've seen travelers before, of course, traders from nearby cities, merchants ferrying goods along the river. But these newcomers radiate purpose. They are delegates, messengers, diplomats, and in their hands they carry tablets. Your heart lifts, then twists. You knew intellectually that writing would spread beyond your city, beyond the temples and palaces of Sumer. But seeing it clutched in the hands of strangers is another thing entirely. The high scribe meets you at the courtyard steps. They came from far north, he whispers, a land of different tongues. And they carry writing. So it seems. You and the high scribe step forward together to greet the visitors. Their leader, a man with a trimmed beard and a cloak pinned with a copper brooch, bows deeply. His interpreter steps beside him. The leader offers a clay tablet with both hands reverently. You take it carefully. The marks on the tablet resemble cuneiform, but they fall into patterns you don't recognize. Wedge strokes arranged in sequences that feel familiar, and yet strange. The lines curve slightly differently. The spacing breathes with another rhythm. The interpreter speaks softly. He says this is their message. They heard your city has mastered the art of clay writing. They want to trade knowledge. A murmur ripples across the courtyard. Scribes lean in. Priests exchange glances. Even the temple cat seems unusually intrigued, tail twitching like a metronome. You study the tablet. Some marks resemble signs you know Grainwater land, but others mean nothing to you. You gesture to the interpreter. Can you read it? He nods. Yes, the signs are our variant. We changed them to fit our tongue. He recites the message aloud. You listen carefully. It's a greeting, a request for trade, an invitation for alliance in the exchange of goods and knowledge. You nod slowly, impressed. A mainstream historical fact glides across your thoughts. Cuneiform eventually spread far beyond Sumer, used by Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Elamites, Hittites, Hurrians, and many others, each adapting the script to their own languages. This tablet in your hand is a living hint of that future. The high scribe touches the wedge marks with a gentle finger. It is our writing, he whispers, and also not our writing. Language, you say, travels like water. It takes the shape of whatever it touches. The visitors smile at your words. One of them offers another tablet, larger, heavier. You lift it. This one contains a list of trade goods. Timbertin fine wool, perhaps even lapis lazuli, but the amounts are recorded using symbols that look suspiciously like the startled duck impressions your apprentices make when they're tired. The high scribe leans close. Interesting, he murmurs. They borrow our script, but bend it. You feel a strange warmth in your chest. Writing isn't just spreading, it's evolving. Stretching learning to speak in new accents. You guide the delegates inside to the temple hall, where mats are set out and incense curls upward like a welcoming hand. The visitors sit, exchanging polite nods with the priests. The high scribe gestures to you to take a seat at the center. The leader of the foreign party produces another tablet, this one inscribed with their names and titles. He points to one symbol in particular, saying something in his own language. The interpreter smiles. It is the sign for his city. He says it means hill shaped like a horn. You chuckle. Our city sign means the place of strong river reeds. The leader laughs a deep, warm sound. He presses a sign resembling an upside-down wedge into a scrap of clay and hands it to you. Your turn, the interpreter says. Give him your sign. You press your city's sign into the clay, a stylized stalk of reed. He examines it with the same wonder you felt examining his. Two civilizations exchanging names. But then something unexpected happens. The leader presses several signs rapidly into the tablet. His city's name, your city's symbol, the sign for exchange, and a final mark you don't recognize. You raise a questioning eyebrow. The interpreter says softly, "It means friendship." The room exhales. A fringe tidbit bubbles in your memory. Archaeologists later discovered whole archives of diplomatic tablets, letters exchanged between distant kings, written in adapted cuneiform, negotiating peace, requesting marriages, even sending gifts of exotic animals. Writing became the fabric of diplomacy long before messengers rode with papyrus scrolls. You take a fresh tablet and respond in writing, your stylus clicking steadily. Our city welcomes yours, exchange knowledge, goods, peace. You add your own makeshift symbol for friendship, not the same as theirs, not better, simply yours. The leader beams. Suddenly a priest hurries in with a message. The governor wants to meet the visitors. You lead the group to the palace, where the governor sits with his usual blend of importance and mild impatience. He greets the foreigners grandly, though you suspect he doesn't understand a word of their speech. But when he sees the tablets, his expression shifts. He nods approvingly, eyeing the diplomatic marks like a craftsman, evaluating rare materials. Write my message to them, he instructs you warmly. Use your finest wedges. You swallow a laugh. Of course. You write slowly, carefully. Welcome trade abundance. Mutual benefit. Shared memory. The foreigners bow deeply when they receive the tablet. When the meeting ends, the delegates wander the courtyard with the high scribe, comparing signs, exchanging symbols, improvising new ones. One scribe excitedly points out that the visitor's sign for mountain resembles a sideways fish. The visitors admit sheepishly that it was originally a fish symbol repurposed, reinterpreted, reimagined. Historians still argue whether the spread of cuneiform was deliberate cultural influence or a practical adoption by neighbors who needed a writing system fast. Watching two scribes from different worlds excitedly debate whether a mark means sheep or snow, you sense the answer is both. As the sun begins to sink, the delegates prepare to leave. They present gifts: fine wool, polished copper. A small jar of incense, so fragrant it almost knocks you backwards. In return, the high scribe offers a set of teaching tablets, each carved with the basic signs. A gift of language. A gift of memory. As the caravan disappears down the dusty road, you hold one of their tablets in your hands. The marks shimmer in the fading light, familiar and foreign at once. When signs cross borders, something profound happens. Writing stops belonging to one people. It becomes a world traveler, a bridge, a witness. And in that moment, standing in the quiet courtyard, you realize that your clay-born script now carries more than words. It carries humanity forward. The next dawn breaks with a restless wind, the kind that sweeps low across the riverbanks and plucks loose reeds from the water's edge. You step outside, expecting the usual calm, but instead you feel the city thrumming beneath your feet like a drum stretched too tight. Something in the air has shifted. Unease whispers between the walls of the temple, weaving itself into conversations drifting through the workshops, lingering in the silence of the archive halls. You walk toward the courtyard, noting the signs: fewer merchants arguing, more guards pacing. The apprentices huddle close, whispering. The donkeys, normally loud with complaints, stand oddly still, ears twitching in an agitated rhythm. Even the temple cat is awake early, which is a sign of divine imbalance all by itself. A priest rushes toward you, breathless. "Come," he says. "There's trouble at the granary." Trouble. You follow him quickly through the winding streets. Dust rises around your ankles. People murmur as you pass, men tightening ropes around their bundles, women whispering about rations, children clutching their mothers' robes. It feels like the whole city is bracing for a storm, though the sky remains deceptively clear. At the granary you find a crowd gathered. The governor's steward stands on the steps holding a clay tablet with trembling fingers. The workers below shout at him, though not with their usual lively bickering. This anger runs deeper, heavier. When he sees you, he thrusts the tablet forward. The records, he says, voice cracking. "They've been altered. You take the tablet. It's one of the ration logs you wrote weeks ago, carefully crafted, neatly ordered. But now extra wedges crowd the margins. Quantities have been changed, names added, storage amounts reduced. The forgery is crude but effective enough to cause panic. Who would do this, you ask quietly? Someone powerful, the steward whispers. Someone with access. A chill slides through you. Writing once a safeguard against confusion has become a weapon, its authority twisted. You stare at the altered marks, feeling a dull ache in your chest. The script you helped shape has gained strength. But strength can be misused. A mainstream historical fact rises unbidden as bureaucratic writing systems expanded. So too did the potential for manipulation. False records forged seals, altered contracts. Even in early Mesopotamia, some tablets show evidence of tampering or overwriting. You are seeing the beginning of that shadow. The governor arrives shortly after Face Storm darkened. He demands an investigation. Workers shout competing accusations. Priests insist the gods must be consulted. Apprentices hover uncertainly at the edges. Styluses clutched like swords too heavy for their hands. You slip away from the noise and walk toward the river tablet still in your grasp. Clay warms in the sunlight, the forged marks glaring up at you. You kneel on the bank, pressing your fingers into the soft soil. Clay doesn't lie, you whisper, but humans do. Suddenly you feel a presence behind you. It's the high scribe. His face is weary. This was always possible, he says softly. The moment writing gained power, someone would use it to steal instead of preserve. And now you ask. Now he replies, we create safeguards. He kneels beside you, tracing lines in the sand. We need seals, marks that cannot be altered without leaving a scar, and witnesses, and procedures for verifying truth. You watch him draw circles, crosslines, combinations of wedges. A system of authentication begins to take shape. Writing is adapting to its own growing shadow. You return with him to the granary to implement these new protections. Clay ceilings are created, small lumps impressed with unique patterns that break if tampered with. The apprentices learn to press witness marks beside key transactions. You draft a new class of symbols that indicate verified, sealed, authentic. The workers, reassured, disperse slowly. Order returns, though shaken. But the day has more to reveal. A messenger from a nearby settlement arrives at the city gates, dust covering his cloak. He brings news. A rival city is rising, wealthy from trade routes, bold with ambition. They have adopted a new writing system, leaner, simpler, easier to learn. An alphabet of sorts. Rumor says it allows even common traders to write their own records. The high scribe grows still, a new script. Yes, the messenger says. It uses far fewer signs. Your heart tightens. You think of your hundreds of wedge-shaped symbols, the complex grammar, the training, the years it takes to become a scribe. What happens when another system offers the same power with a fraction of the effort? Historians still argue whether the rise of alphabetic systems spelled the decline of cuneiform because of political shifts or because alphabets were simply more efficient. But standing here now, watching the high scribe's expression darken, you sense the pressure mounting. It won't replace our script, an apprentice insists. Ours is stronger, older. You place a gentle hand on his shoulder. Older, yes. But strength is not the same as simplicity. Night approaches, and with it unsettling quiet. The city feels fragile in the fading light, like a clay tablet not yet fired. You return to the archives, seeking comfort among the tablets. But even here the unease seeps through. Some tablets crack with age. Others crumble at the edges. A few symbols grow faint, difficult to read. And you suddenly feel the truth in your bones. Everything humans make is vulnerable to ambition, to decay, to change. You sit cross-legged on the floor surrounded by shelves of memory. You think of the delegates from the north with their altered script. You think of the forged records. You think of the new alphabet spreading like a whisper carried by wind. The world is shifting. The clay world you helped shape is cracking in places you cannot yet mend. A soft rustle draws your eyes upward. The high scribe stands in the doorway holding a lamp. "Do not mistake change for ending," he says softly. "Even clay must be reshaped from time to time." He sets the lamp beside you and leaves. Its glow flickers across the tablets, warm, fragile, determined. You rest your stylus on your knee. Cracks in the clay world are inevitable. But so is the next step forward. You take a fresh tablet, smooth its surface, and begin pressing new marks, sharper, more deliberate, ready for whatever comes next. At sunrise, the city feels strangely hushed, as if holding its breath before a change too large to measure. You step through the temple courtyard, clay dust lifting around your feet in small ghosts, and feel the world turning beneath you. Slow, deliberate, inevitable. The cracked granary tablet from yesterday sits on a bench near the entrance, a quiet reminder of how fragile truth can be when pressed into mud. You inhale deeply. The air carries the scent of river reed smoke and something faintly metallic like the taste of coming change. You walk toward the archives expecting the usual morning bustle, but instead you find the high scribe standing alone outside the doorway, his hands clasped behind him. He watches you approach. "It is time," he says. "For what you ask, though, somewhere in your bones you already know." He leads you inside. The archive shelves stretch in calm rows, but today they feel different, like a forest whose roots have begun to tremble. You notice it immediately. Several new tablets are laid out on the central table. Their shapes are familiar, but their signs are simpler. Too simple. You pick one up. It contains a message written in the new alphabet. You've only heard rumors about fewer symbols, fewer strokes, easy to carve, even on materials other than clay. "A trader brought it this morning," the high scribe explains. "It came from the rival city. Their merchants already use it. Their children are learning it. Their governors endorse it. You turn the tablet over in your hands. The signs look like shadows of your wedges, stripped down, cut loose, wandering free of clay. Your chest tightens. Clay may not be the only house for writing much longer, the high scribe murmurs. You sit slowly. The earth feels softer than it should, like you're sinking into a world that's changing faster than you can shape it. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your thoughts. Cuneiform endured for millennia, but eventually, simpler alphabets, more flexible, more portable, easier to learn, rose to dominance across regions once ruled by wedges. You press your stylus against your palm, feeling the tapered point. A lifetime of marks. Generations of scribes learning the same precise angles, the same grammar, the same shape of thought. And now the high scribe speaks again. "This new script will not replace ours, not immediately, but it will compete, and eventually, perhaps it will win." You stare at the stylus. "What about everything we've written?" "It will remain," he says, "but fewer hands will know how to read it. The words settle on your skin like dust." A young apprentice rushes into the archive, breathless. "Master the governor wants you," he cries. "He says the scribes must prepare new tablets for the treaty with the northern traders." The high scribe raises an eyebrow. "Written in which script?" The apprentice shifts anxiously. He wants both. Of course he does. The world is splitting into two systems, and for now, people straddle both like anxious acrobats. You and the high scribe follow the apprentice to the palace. Inside, the governor sits surrounded by guards and advisors, all tense. A messenger stands beside him, holding tablets from the northern delegates, written half in wedges, half in letters, signs colliding in the clay like merging rivers. The governor frowns at you. "Make sense of this," he demands. You take the tablets and sit at a low table. The stylus feels heavier than usual. You rewrite the terms, carefully translating the unfamiliar letters into wedges. But with each stroke, you feel the tug of the future pulling away from the clay you know. One advisor mutters under his breath, "Why learn the old script when the new one is easier?" Another counters, "Because our laws, our histories, our myths, everything is in wedges." They argue softly but urgently. The room hums with uncertainty. A fringe tidbit slips into your mind. Some late-era cuneiform tablets show evidence that scribes tried to adapt the old system to fit newer alphabets, sometimes mixing scripts, sometimes abandoning entire sections mid-tablet. Scholars still puzzle over these hybrids, half tradition, half innovation, half confusion. When you finish the treaty tablet, the governor nods, satisfied but restless. "We will need more scribes," he says, "ones who know both forms." The high scribe answers carefully, "Then we will teach both." But you hear the tremor beneath his calm voice. Hours later you walk through the city as dusk settles. The streets glow with torchlight. Traders close their stalls. Workers return home. Children chase each other laughing. Life continues oblivious to the shifting era beneath their feet. You pause by the riverbank where clay has always waited for you. This is where it began, the first mark, the hesitant sign, the symbols that learned to speak. You kneel and dip your fingers into the mud. It clings cool and familiar. The clay whispers its ancient promise, "I can hold memory. I can keep your words safe." But above the river, the wind carries whispers of reeds and parchment ink and alphabet lighter materials waiting to take writing away from clay. The high scribe joins you quietly. He sets down a small tablet, a fresh one blank. "Write," he says gently. "Not for the temple, not for the governor, for yourself." You stare at the blank clay lit by the fading light. You press a final sequence of wedges, slow and deliberate. "I was here. I shaped the marks that shaped the world. Let these signs remember." You add one more symbol, your personal mark, the one you invented long ago when you first began teaching the apprentices. A small wedge angled like a rising dawn. A promise. As you finish, the high scribe exhales softly. "Even when our script fades," he murmurs, "these tablets will remain. And if no one can read them, you ask. Then they will still speak," he replies. Clay remembers even when tongues forget. The sky darkens. The first stars appear bright, patient, unchanging. You close your eyes and listen to the world settling around you. The rivers whisper, the distant murmur of families, the gentle clatter of tablets in the archives, the faint echo of alphabets taking root beyond the horizon. And then, slowly, you rise. You hold the final tablet to your chest, feeling the softness of the clay and the firmness of the marks. It is a small thing, fragile and eternal, like all human memory. You walk back toward the archives, toward the quiet, flickering lamps, toward the shelves where tablets sleep in rows like resting stories, and you place the final slab gently among them. It settles into silence. The last light of the stylus fades from your fingers, but its echo will endure. The courtyard lies empty now, save for the drifting hush of evening. You take slow steps across the familiar earth, feeling the rhythm of your breath ease into the rhythm of the fading day. The lamps sway softly in the breeze, their glow spreading out in long, warm strokes across the clay walls. Each light seems to dim a little as the night deepens, as though the world is easing itself into rest and inviting you to do the same. You pause beneath the archway and let your eyes close. The scent of river reeds and distant smoke floats gently around you, settling like a comforting blanket. The sounds of the city soften the last murmurs of families indoors. The faint clunk of a pot being set aside, the quiet rustle of the night wind as it slips through the reeds. Everything slows, stretches, drifts into a quieter shape. You let the final image rise in your mind, a tablet resting peacefully on its shelf. Edges cool signs glimmering faintly in lamplight. No urgency now, no hurried impressions, no disputes or decrees, just the simple enduring presence of memory at rest. The world for this moment asks nothing more of you. Your shoulders soften, your thoughts loosen. The long arc of clay and story settles into calm, weaving itself gently into the stillness around you. And as the darkness gathers, velvet soft and welcoming, you feel the last traces of the day dissolve. Rest now. Let the quiet carry you. Let the night close gently around your breathing.